Welcome to Office Hours. Whether you're new to the acupuncture profession or have been at it for decades, this is the place where we discuss all things Chinese medicine and more. Join Toby Daly, a seasoned acupuncturist of the Som tradition, and Angelique Britt, a nurse turned acupuncturist who is brand new to the field, as they explore topics in and around the world of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. There's something for everyone here. Drop in anytime.
Heiner Fruehauf, welcome to Office Hours. So nice to see you.
Same here. Thank you.
I think a lot of our listeners will be really familiar with your work, but on the chance that some of them aren't very familiar, would you mind giving us like a little bit of your professional background? And if you could somehow lead it into your latest project to the Healing Order.
Yeah, I originally was born into a family of German nature cure physicians. Those are MDs who exclusively practice homeopathy and hydrotherapy, those kinds of things. It was a big family. Everybody was a doctor. I wanted to do something totally different. So, upon graduation from high school, I studied Chinese, which was thoroughly unpopular at a time when China had just opened after being basically closed completely for several decades during the Cultural Revolution. And then was one of the first people to go to China, met my American wife there, got a PhD from the University of Chicago, and was all ready to be a teacher of Chinese literature, and then got diagnosed with cancer as a young man, and that prompted me to go back to China for self-healing purposes, but also just was interested in this modality that was helping me that before I only encountered theoretically, and I got so enamored with that that after 2 years, instead of taking a position actually that was open at the time at Harvard University to teach Chinese literature. I never looked back and founded the College of Classical Chinese Medicine here at National University of Natural Medicine, Portland, Oregon, and was sort of partially at least instrumental in coining the term classical Chinese medicine in contrast to the regularly used TCM, which stands for traditional Chinese medicine, of course, but found and my teachers found that the way how this medicine is nowadays, at least in China, taught and practiced, and how it then initially came over to the West was anything but traditional, but was basically Chinese medicine filtered through a Western medicine lens and understood through a biochemical and anatomical lens, and lots of things, particularly any kind of overly immaterial content, right? My dear friend and colleague, Liu Tong, author of Classical Chinese Medicine, that book that we helped to translate, he always talks about, uses the I Ching term "xing er shang" and "xing er xia," above the level of the material, below the level of the material. So
Mm.
immaterial, the world of the immaterial and the world of the material, the world of matter, the world of the red dust, the world of the sticks and stone reality, as some physicists call that. And he, as well as my other teachers, they are of the opinion that Chinese medicine is primarily a Xing Shang medicine, which means it lives in the realm of the immaterial and the realm of the spiritual, even. And that has been sort of cleansed out of the record because, of course, we know that China has a government that already since 1949 has devoted to the ideology of Marxist materialism, which is not that different from scientific materialism that we practice over here, but then wanted at the same time to bring Chinese medicine back as sort of a patriotic statement. This is our culture. This is uniquely Chinese, but only, and Mao Zedong started that under the auspices of Western medicine, where it was
Mm.
almost strictly sort of like there was this police person there with the Ministry of Health, which had Chinese Western medicine over Chinese medicine and was literally nitpicking. This book is okay, that book is not okay. This kind of article is okay, that is not okay. proceeding in this kind of a fashion. And so when I came back in 1992, actually, I was greatly encouraged by my main teacher within the university, who was the dean at Chengdu University, TCM in pharmacology. Start a real Chinese medicine college that he didn't have the power to change the curriculum over there since the whole country was using the same government issued book. And so we did, and then we've had a good run for 35 years until the college itself decided to also go the Western medicine route, as so many others are doing, but had an influence on the profession, I believe. I also published an article together with Professor Deng called Chinese Medicine in Crisis, Science, Politics, and the Making of TCM, which is kind of chronicling what I just said in greater detail and with lots of footnotes in the late 1990s. And that prompted several schools to change their previously TCM curriculum to something that was more of what they always wanted to do, but never felt, because it was this real Westerners doing Chinese medicine. Well, the Chinese themselves do that. We must be overly romanticizing the medicine until it was like, oh my God, I have permission to charge forward. This is always what I thought Chinese medicine actually was. And here are some historical reasons that we are not bound by. And therefore let's practice and teach the medicine in this way. I primarily I had a little bit needle phobic because my father was a neural therapist, meaning he basically practiced acupuncture with injection needles and did that already on us when we were 5 years old. So I just see a needle. Even now, I get goosebumps. So even though I'm a licensed acupuncturist,
Angelique is doing that to her kids.
I did it when I was in school. No.
but so as a result of it, I was more interested in the herbs. I felt the herbs were also helping me the most in the Qigong. And so we implemented also at the College of Classical Chinese Medicine, one of the most rigorous, classically based, lots of Shangan Lun reading and etc. programs in the country. And was always, because of my own disease background, was very much focused on difficult and recalcitrant diseases, and including cancer. My practice has been that for the last 35 years or more. And yeah, as a result of it, I not only 15 years ago established the herb company Classical Pearls out of the need that I felt like that if you are not just by reputation, that anything coming out of China, unfortunately, including the herbs, is getting a lower and lower reputation. Like pet food and all other kinds of things. There have been lots of scandals, but also as just knowing that even if you prescribe a perfect formula, then you using herbs that were sprayed or even worse, genetically modified or something like that, or using the wrong species, which is very often the case, as my colleague and friend Andy Ellis already pointed out. Almost 40 years ago, using the example of Pinellia, which is even to the present day, we have, when it says Banxia, we're using actually not a Pinellia, but an Arisima species that the Chinese call Shui Banxia, which is an okay replacement for wet phlegm, but it doesn't have the downward moving anti-counterflow type of effect that the true species Pinellia tenata has. So that was a whole fun project to kind of ride around China with jeeps, make lots of connections in the countryside, teach a staff on the ground there, teach the factory there what kind of extraction techniques we want and what our standard is, which is basically the sentence from the Tao Te Ching, 道法自然. If in doubt, go the natural way. The Tao is always following nature. And so all of this, because this is what's happening in China, is this being enamored with modern technology and, oh, it's a shiny new machine. It's got to be better than some traditional kind of stuff that's called tool, right? Which means
Mm.
earthy, meaning that's sort of like grandma stuff that's can't be any good, can't be as good as this shiny machine or science. You just throw in the word science and everybody goes like, oh, that's amazing. It's all scientific. So that was and that venture enabled me because because of course you in the manufacturing business, while it was very risky in the beginning, you put some of your own money on the line there and you don't know whether that stuff's going to spoil on the transport over, whether they're ever going to sell a single bottle of it. But it was quickly I'm grateful that I was steered in that direction because that company is, you know, is saving lives from that's the most important from a mission perspective, and allowed me also to fulfill another mandate that my herb teacher, Professor Deng, gave me, which is incorporating powder into the
Mm.
equation, which has almost been forgotten, like the alchemical processing of single herbs will then immediately impart a different direction or underline a particular potential of efficacy in the herb. And that's very labor intensive and it's not normally done anymore. But then, of course, the company also generates income even if you're not seeing patients, and that then enabled me to have the funds for something I've always wanted to do that many of us want to do, but I haven't been able to because of the not just lack of finances, but lack of support from the
Mm.
financial industry. I learned that even with financial funds, where you can prove a track record, I can pay this mortgage, even if this business is blank for a year or two, I have other company that can pay for it. The banks would not loan us any money to build a larger retreat center that has
Huh.
inpatient capacity. If we would have said we want to invest in Walmart or just buy a house or something, invest in a strip mall, they would have all, said no problem. But
Mm.
oh my God, some alternative medicine. There was always you were being led along, and you have to supply every month's an update. And then at the end, it's like these national banks, you like a level higher and and then in the last meeting, some guy sits there in the board of directors and says,
Yeah.
that's crazy. We're not going to do that. And then you just get a phone call in the whole year of tediously hiring like an accountant to document every single thing and everything you did do, everything you will do, all the paperwork. And then you start over again, and there's another
Yeah.
bank, and that says, "Oh, we so super interested. Yeah, we so much more flexible than this other bank." But then the same thing happens. So we kind of wasted like many years, and of course we are out here in the Columbia River Gorge, which is one of the most scenic, but also because of that, is a national park that is incredibly strictly regulated in terms of business opportunities. And so we purchased a historic building that was that has in an iconic spot. mm, and with an illustrious history like Clark Gable, FDR, Charlie
Mm.
Chaplin, they all stayed in this 1924 building that once was called the Vista House because you have such a commanding view over the Columbia River Gorge. But that was now completely fire damaged and water damaged. The floors were buckled like half a yard off the floor, so much water, totally mildewy and so, but we bought that building because it was in nature. It wasn't in the city. Oregon is not Nevada. You can't just buy a plot of land and just open a business. It's super outside of the city boundaries, very strictly controlled. And so we spent 8.5 years building this, like working with 7 government agencies, the Indian tribes, to make sure you're not damaging any graves that potentially could be there, the transportation department, the forest service, the various nonprofits who want to raise all the buildings that exist in the gorge and not allow any new ones. But we were finally able to convince all of these stakeholders in the local community that this is a good idea and historical buildings are allowed to have business. And then when we finally had a lot of equity in the building, about 50%, and the interest rates were super high at 9%. Then the bank
Wow.
said, wow, we are so willing to give you money now. So that then helped us to kind of finally finish. And as of 2 months ago, we are in that building, which is called the Healing Order and is probably, as far as Chinese medicine is concerned, probably the largest Chinese medicine center in North America with like 9 treatment rooms and 5 bedrooms for people to stay overnight for 1-week retreats where people do Qigong in the morning, meditation at night, get 1 or 2 treatments a day, and get a lecture at night about exercise and nutrition. And the goal is, of course, to not just give people a treatment, but have them understand how did you get yourself in this pickle in the first place. And so when you go back home, how do you change, not fall back into patterns or so? And of course, after a week of treatments every day and hikes in the gorge, and you feel already much different, and you feel like some reset has already occurred. So that is the latest project that gave me more gray hair than any of the other ones.
It's amazing the fortitude to push that through. I remember hearing that banks will only loan you money when you don't need it.
Yeah, that is not the metaphor. That is exactly. They go like, "You want to borrow $1 million? Well, show us $1 million in collateral over here." Like if I had it, why would I ask you?
I'm so excited about that vision. And I already have a patient that I've partially referred to your website to look at it. And I think I am going to send her. But so you feel like a week is good, or like, especially something really recalcitrant like that? Do you feel like that's your ideal stay for somebody?
Well,
Longer?
I mean, it's like this. It's, as you know, since we're all in the same business, one of the famous sentences in the Huangdi Neijing is, and one of my teachers at the university in China gave that to me as a calligraphy when I left, which is that sentence from the Neijing that says, if you're drilling a well, starting to drill a well when you're already thirsty, and when you're starting to forge weapons when the battle has already begun, isn't that too late? So, of course, our business is primarily not treating serious cases that with oxygen tanks and metastasis everywhere when they're already at that stage, but ideally keep people healthy. So this is called, therefore, a wellness center. So we want to help people stay healthy and also want to have that energy in the center. However, since our bread and butter for the last 35 years has been difficult and recalcitrant diseases, so we've been getting many people with cancer, getting many people with heart disease and heart failure, getting many people with COPD and serious kidney and liver stuff, etc., diabetes, whatnot. Of course, that will stay open to those people. The question is just like, that is an ongoing 5-year project mostly in that case. And yes, you can stay 2 weeks, 3 weeks is even better. But, it's more meant to be for these people who stressed out. They haven't had a vacation in a long time. And then after a week, you feel like I'm back, which hopefully will happen with people also who have more serious types of diseases, but that is, we can't really call a reset there because it'll still be like a drop on the stone that needs to be continued. But the idea is then to send people home with like sort of 3 to 6 months worth of program that they then continue
Hmm.
home for sure. So we open to both regular health maintenance as well as more serious kind of problems we've been treating before. Of course, it's also a cost thing, because it
Yeah.
is like in this relatively fancy building now, has this gigantic mortgage and this huge staff. Before it was just me and, an acupuncturist and one person answering the phone. And now we like this 15 people milling around the facility. So you have like, yeah, I mean, the idea is to have a model for alternative healthcare in this country, not just for greater live in the materialist society. So you have this iconic place and fancy in this special historic place and with real serious money involved there, it people then believe that that's got to be real medicine if there is such a, like 11,000 square foot building there. But really, at the same time, we living at a time, as you well know, when every day there is some the Empress College in LA collapsed, and OCOM and
Yeah.
Court collapsed, and so this clinic collapsed. And people blogging and saying our school defrauded us by telling us, we could make all this, pay our loans back, and we feel like we can't. So the attempt is to create a center that's not only offers a serious alternative, not just sort of, oh, we do injury medicine and that alone, but are we willing to have disorders rather than referring you right back out? Um, it was also a goal to show them that this is like like we should be able to pay people similar wages than is that a nurse gets paid, that a physician's assistant gets paid, that a doctor gets paid. There shouldn't, people should aspire, not just because they want to help people to go into this medicine, but because it's a viable, from economic and financial perspective, is a viable option. And then, of course, you do that, you train the people, and you pay decent wages, then you are in a fancy building, and with all of these, not just Chinese, by the way, but European nature cure modalities, like we have a Polish salt room that mimics the atmosphere of Polish salt mines where nobody ever gets a cold or COVID or asthma. We have German oil dispersion bath in the Steinerian anthroposophical medicine way. We have French Vichy shower that's combined with Chinese medicine herb wraps. We have Japanese cedar enzyme bath. We have Korean charcoal room. So there are lots of wonderful modalities from all over the world. So it's an idealist Fabergé egg project that everybody, including my family, is making fun of me because I didn't want to cut corners anywhere there. But then that means, it's you come to a facility like that, you stay there, you're getting like 3 locally sourced biodynamic meals with an on-site cook, you having on-site trainers, you having on-site people who walk you in the forest. That is sort of, that'll cost money. So if somebody, unless you're independently wealthy, you couldn't just say, I'm going to stay there for 3 months.
Yeah.
That would be great, but that's why we're going for just a day or two is too short. But I think in a week or so, you should feel some kind of difference. At the very least, you can say, we know this person's, how they reacting. We can see how they're reacting to the herbs and the supplements and to the other kinds of hands-on treatments. And so that when they're going home, they already is a difference, but also when there's a long distance, a follow-up or so, we have a pretty good idea who this person is already.
It's so heartening to see a Chinese medicine institution being started in 2026. It's and with a model that could be replicated out in the future. And then it's possible, like now that you're showing that it works, banks in the future might they might be able to point to, oh, look, this does work, right? We can make this financially possible going forward. I always
You're
feel,
absolutely correct.
mm,
Just like when you're buying a house and then the real estate agent does comps, like what
yeah,
is the square footage worth in your neighborhood, this is exactly what the bank will do and go like, give us examples from the whole country of similar institutions, and ideally with their as much financial information as you can provide for them. So that is the goal, is to, because I'm 65 this year and I retired from in-person teaching at the university. Of course, we have this classicalchinesemedicine.org platform, more if there than ever, and enjoy that, and we'll continue doing that for a long time. We just opened the doors of the Healing Order Wellness Center, so I'll be there for a long time. But the real goal is really not create a headache for me in almost retirement times, but is to inspire the profession and go like, anybody can do this, and
mm,
I'm be not only in the business of inspiring you and cheering you on, but will actively teach you how to do that. Or if this is successful, even more, we'll be your bank. We'll invest in your center and
yeah,
become partners in that venture, because this is an important part, and I'm sort of following Lu Hong's lead here, who, after writing Sukao Zhongyi, that we translated as classical Chinese medicine, which is not only, by the way, in China became a best-selling, for many years, the the best-selling nonfiction books for many years, over 1 million copies sold. But even, while this is of course not the case in the West, but as far as Chinese University of Hong Kong Press goes, that publishes very geeky academic books, they say this book is selling much more, or other kinds of books as well. So I'm glad to hear that. But he sort of started a revolution back to lineages, back to a classical way of thinking in China. So we've always been sort of friends for almost 30 years now, and joint efforts here in East and West doing similar things. While before he was retired and he was still senior professor at Guangxi University of TCM, he founded the Research Institute for the Clinical Investigation of Chinese Medicine, because he felt that it wasn't through theory at this point, right? In this country, since the 1970s, we've swollen from certificate programs to master programs to doctorate programs, and then having 72 of them. And granted, there's been a little bit of a contraction, but nevertheless, there was a tremendous effort on the educational certification, getting licensure, in comparison to the naturopaths that only have, like, I think 17 states. There's
mm,
almost all 50 states have licensure for acupuncture. So that's tremendous success really on educational and licensure level. But clinically, even the profession itself doesn't believe that we can treat cancer, even in a complementary fashion while people are on chemotherapy. That we believe we can't treat heart disease when people are on high blood pressure medication, but that we even teach that at school, you need to stay away from that, and kind of regulated ourselves into this kind of very narrow window of pain where also the insurance companies pay for. And so he felt that was true in China as well. So he said, we need to show that this medicine really works. Let's focus on the clinic, because it's our patients who will refer patients. And so that was sort of one of the goals why, at this stage in my life, I got involved in this headache-inducing project, because I feel like our profession needs clinical centers, not
mm,
just teaching theory at this point, but seeing the theory in action and document it, eventually maybe have a magazine or some kind of a research arm associated with that, which is not that necessarily Western medicine research, but at the very, case-based learning, which we are already perpetuating doing on classicalchinesemedicine.org. Basically, all of my classes online now are case-based learning or so.
Yeah,
So
again,
great.
I'm just so heartened again that again you've got an institution in demonstrating the effectiveness of Chinese medicine, and then if you could document case by case coming through there, especially Angelique and I, we just get hour max with patients. What a fantasy to spend a week or two, and just immersed in that, and then to be able to go from that. I feel like that's yeah. Anyways, really exciting news. Again, sorry about the headaches, but the end product sounds amazing.
Well, I'm born in the year of the ox, so that's sort of when the ox doesn't have anything else, the Chinese say, to put its horns into, it feels uncomfortable. So this kind of suffering and then letting everybody know what a bitter life one has, that is part of the ox's MO. So
I don't know. That seems like almost too many yokes, though. All those government agencies, 7 or so yokes on
yes,
you. I think that
yes.
might have been too much.
Underneath of that, though, the ox is always delighting when he gets to tell other people about these difficulties. Uh,
That's so great.
if you're born in the year of the pig, it's more like I just managed to have this year vacation or something, and that is your pride. So that's like that's then the opposite MO. So we are just all different. So
Yeah, lucky for that.
yes, I sometimes wish I was born in the year of the pig
Yes.
rather than the ox, but yeah.
I know you're just recently back from a trip to China. Any highlights from that trip?
Yes, there were many, many highlights indeed. There's usually some kind of interpersonal drama when you go with a group of like 25 to 50 people to China. And this time I only went there as a kind of pilgrimage to my only still surviving teacher's Professor Wang Yu's 90th birthday. And I opened the door for anybody who knows him from years ago when he came over here in the 1990s and was teaching here or been to China with me before. So everybody who came was a not kind of commercial trip. It was just a bunch of like-minded people who all knew each other really well. And so for the first time in 32 years of doing these trips, there was like no drama virtually because everybody was sort of a veteran. And then secondly, so that was nice. And as a result of it, we just got to focus on the impressions and the experiences we had. It was really a smorgasbord of remarkable experiences, starting with a place in northern China that is called Tong. This is a dangerous question because I could probably got to talk for 2 hours if you don't stop me.
I said only highlights.
Only highlights, but everything was a highlight. But last year I went, and Liu Hong, who I always visit when I go there, he kind of introduced me to this special mineral water and said this hot spring in Datong in northern China, and it comes from like 3 kilometers deep, and it's this healing water. And I took some bottles home with me, and it's this super alkaline water, almost pH of 9. And as you may know, I'm using in my clinical practice as in addition to asking questions and time and pulse in our regular Chinese medicine in PEC, I use German electrodermal screening procedures to verify that something is actually wanted by the patient. And this was the only substance I've ever investigated in this manner in 35 years that was a medicine for everybody. Usually everything, just like the herbs and fruits, the same thing or this supplement, that superfood, you test it, oh, it's good for this person, but doesn't do anything for that person. For that person, this is the same substance, even allergic. And this water was like a medicine for everybody. So that caught my attention. I've never seen a substance like this. And I went like, I want to go back to this place. And so we bathe in this water. It turns out this was made by China is always not just about the places, but about the people. So this person, like remarkable Mr. what was his name? My goodness, this is like one of these kind of Mr. Gore. Mr. Gore was his name, or Dr. Gore, but he was like he was educated as a barefoot doctor in the 1970s during the Cultural Revolution, which basically means he got 2 weeks worth of training, and then somebody said, "You're a licensed physician now." And then he just was so entrepreneurial that he just started this own shack, and then that shack got bigger, and then he made more shacks and hired more people. So now he's like bigger than the government hospital. He has like 3 huge hospitals
Wow.
in the city of Datong, one only for tumors, one only for cardiovascular, and one for all the rest of it. And he makes, it's interesting that his full name is Guo Runli. Runli means he who makes all of the profit. So I don't know whether he changed his name. I don't think that is legal in China, actually change your name. But so he was proudly telling us how he's netting $900 million US dollars a year, but he doesn't believe in Western medicine. And so he uses all of this profit to build like this huge Chinese medicine hospital in the countryside outside of
Wow.
Datong with 500 beds. It has like these, hotel nearby, and where people can just and has like 135 private courtyards in the traditional northern style, where you can kind of let the water come into your own tub in your own suite, so to speak.
Ooh.
Because once he developed that, he discovered there was this water underneath, so he drilled really deep until he reached it and found that it was one of the best, even from a biochemical perspective, one of the best waters in the world, really. There is an institute in Germany, the Fresenius Institute, that evaluates waters from all around the world. So most hot spring waters, you can just sulfur, right? It's very sulfury, and it's very good for your skin. It's good for rheumatoid arthritis, etc. But you can't drink that water; it would be hard on your kidneys. Whereas this water is excellent to drink. And
Mm.
while he does do train out their acupuncture, moxibustion, herbs, most patients he just gives this water to bathe in it every single day. And there's these amazing case examples of all kinds of cures that they are affecting there. So that was like a very real experience. Also, it was amazing. He had this because now, I mean, technically billionaire using that money to, instead of like doing this what's called 暴发户 behavior thing in China, which is this nouveau riche, right? Driving Lamborghinis and totally spoiling your kids and having them, fly in private jets to Paris all the time, which is sort of what happens a lot. He like just still walks around with this gray communist suit, and while he does have a driver, it's just a normal car and whatnot. But he invests his money to buy back Chinese medicine texts from abroad, particularly Japan.
Ah.
Wow.
So he is willing to drop $2 million on a little book like this from the Ming Dynasty. That's the only extant version of, I don't know, Bensao Gamu or something like
Oh.
this. So he has one expert on staff that does nothing but just Hong Kong, Sotheby's, and other auction houses. So he has this full library with all of these treasures. It kind of blew us away. It was amazing. So that was one highlight.
Okay. That
And
was
then,
pretty amazing. So yeah.
and I'll just give you one more highlight to not make it too long, that question, but now we already in northern China. I spent 2 years in Fudan University in the 80s, which is in Shanghai, and 2 years in Chengdu, which is in southwest China. But while I traveled through almost the entire country, I never spent time in northern China, which is now considered sort of a hinterland where country bumpkins live and where coal mining is happening.
Mhm.
And, like when we think China, we think Suzhou, we think gardens, we think bamboo, we think tea, whereas the cradle of Chinese civilization is north of the Yellow River, which is Shanxi province, maybe a little bit south Henan province, maybe a little bit west Shanxi province where Xi'an is. but it's basically what was called Zhongguo, which means the heartland or the center of the world. Really was not what we call Zhongguo, the central country nowadays, which goes all the way to Tibet in the west and all the way to the Vietnamese border in the south. But all of that was considered barbarian country before. It was just this small window of which is primarily Shanxi province, and you have so many artifacts there still standing from the Tang Dynasty and Song Dynasty and Ming Dynasty that you cannot find in the south, where if you find something older, it's usually Qing Dynasty. So that was really remarkable. But as you know, one of my passion projects has been for the last 30 years the Tianrenhe philosophy of Chinese medicine, which is as above, so below, to use hermeneutic alchemical language here, which is that the map that is that is Chinese medicine map, with its meridians and acupuncture points on it, is said to be a reflection of the macrocosm, which means places on Earth, which means stars in the sky. And that is always what is considered Confucian, is considered Taoism to make that statement. But how the microcosm is related to the macrocosm, at least in the mythological imagination of the ancient Chinese, nobody ever fully explored. And so I spent 30 years of scouring, like taking the name of an acupuncture point, where Sun Tzu Miao in the 6th century reminded us and said that the secret of the acupuncture points is in their names. And so I started paying, just like how I teach everything else in the medicine for the last 35 years, by looking at the Chinese characters. What is yin? What is yang? What is liver? What is taiyang? What is the wood element? Those kinds of things. I started applying this symbolist methodology to the names of the acupuncture points, and then was able to identify about a third of the 360 cases, stellar constellations in the sky that are one-to-one relationship to acupuncture points. Very rarely are they directly, like the name of the star. It's usually some kind of hidden roundabout way to relating it to that, where you need to study non-medical texts to find that out. And of course, modern search engines help greatly in this. And then places on the earth. And so I made a map before we went to China with like about 120 dots on it on the earth. And all of those dots, they were to 95% north of the Yellow River, and east of that bend, that they call Henei, inside of the Yellow River. Yellow River at Lungmen at the Dragon Gate comes to the surface, then goes south, and then cuts sharp east toward the ocean. That land that is in between there, that is where most of those points are, in the vicinity of Luoyang, and then also a little bit west to Xia. And so it was just amazing to take the train and go through this ancient land and visit these ancient temples where you still have statues from the Tang Dynasty from 1500 years ago. But, and I will conclude with this, in one instance, we were close enough at the city that's very ancient city, but that I've never heard about before, called Jincheng, close to the Yellow River in Shanxi province. One of my students who's seen in my cosmic map class, where I'm going through every single acupuncture point in this fashion, linking it to different places that we have on classical Chinese medicine.org. There was a drone shot of Mount Wangwu when I was talking about the small intestine, the heart. So this is right in the heartland. It's the number 1 out of 50 mountains in Taoism. And we were just 2 hours away, so we said, let's go there. So we did a day trip, and we went to the top of Mount Wangwu, which was more touristy than we thought it was, because it has a cable car now. You don't need to walk up there. And there were, some monks who were banging against stuff, but that was really just for tourists, I think. But then as we were enjoying the amazing view you have from up there, right? You're looking at the Taiheng Mountains in the west, and you're looking at the Yellow River in the south, and the steep drop of the northern Shanxi Plateau that drops down to the Yellow River, and then comes the Henan Plain south of the river. That was all like so many battles have been fought there, so many legendary figures have walked this land. It's just amazing to stand there and behold that. But I was talking to one of my students and said, somewhere here on this mountain is the source of the Ji River. And as you know, chapter 12 of the Lingshu is this enigmatic chapter that's called Shar Jingshui, the how the 12 rivers or meridians of the body are linked to the 12 sacred rivers in ancient China. And it just is 12 statements. The lung goes with the Yellow River, the large intestine goes with the Yangtze River, and the heart goes with the Ji River. The Ji River is a river that is not wider in many instances than this desk that I'm sitting at here. And that is underground, a lot of its journey. Very much like the heart is an immaterial organ, right? It governs Shen. So it is a Xing Er Shang organ dealing with light, dealing with sacred essences that are immaterial. And therefore, it's no coincidence that the most material, voluminous water-wise rivers, they go with the most material organs along the large intestine, metal, the most structured of the elements, the ones that have most to do with matter, have most to do with money and industrial production, etc., both outside the body as well as inside. So the River Ji is this mysterious river that out of tens of thousands of waterways in China, they pick to represent the heart, and it flows from this mountain, which is called Wangwu Shan, which is the Mount King Chamber. It's like the heartland, the heart chamber of ancient China, which itself is significant. And I said, this mountain is huge, and we need to go back for dinner. They're waiting for us to complain if we won't be there. It would be cool to find the source of that river, right? So the guide who was with us, he spoke some English. He overheard that, asked the monk and said, where's the source of the Ji River? And he said, oh, it's just 5 minutes. You just walk down the steps. It's right there. And that source is interestingly called Tai Yi Chi, which means pond that mirrors the first star of the Big Dipper. So the first star of the Dipper, it doesn't, other than the pole star itself, is at the center of our known universe. And so this is like a mirror to that. So that means it's again heartland, right? So we've got the Ji River, got the heart, we've got the Big Dipper. It's all about the center and the heart. And then we go down to this spring where everybody goes to the top, but nobody goes down there. Nobody knows what this is. Nobody knows what the significance of the Ji River is. I was thinking, if the Ji River originates there, then the spring is resonant with Heart One, the point Heart One. First of all, the geographical location of that is that mountain is like a head here, and then right below that head, it branches out like this, like it has shoulders, and that point is right here, right? It's right below the head. And so we walk down there, and then that so-called spring is not a spring that bubbles from the ground. It doesn't bubble from the rock, but it is a pool that collects water from water that drips down from the top. And the name of Heart One is called Ji Quan, which is the Ji of Taiji, as in Taiji Quan. The Ji Quan is an actual description of a type of spring that falls from the heaven, that falls from the sky, rather than Yongquan, which is bubbling well kidney one name, which is a geyser that comes up from the ground. So there was not only, this naming of acupuncture points is not just metaphorical and fantasy land, but is actually mapping. I mean, you stood in this very small defined place and you were like, the creators of the acupuncture point names, they stood here in this exact spot, and it was just everybody was just like thunderstruck, and we were kind of meditating there and kind of doing a Tibetan water chants, and it was just like the magical moment of the trip, particularly after researching this for 30 years and being not just sort of in the land where the acupuncture points are represented on Earth or resonant with on Earth, but in an actual spot. So, yeah.
That's incredible. I'm restraining myself from asking for a third highlight just because I know Angelique has a question for you.
There's more highlights.
I know. I'm gonna
maybe later.
Yeah, it sounds like quite the trip you had. If I may ask, as a newer practitioner, so I had awareness of classical pearls and I have the manual and I was looking through it and I was feeling a little intimidated by it. Like maybe I didn't know enough, before to start using them. And Toby introduced me how he uses them. And then I read them more closely and I started recognizing patients that I have in some of the formulas that you have there. And so I know I'm personally interested in learning more, but I'm wondering what you would recommend for any practitioner, especially those of us that are newer, to get started with learning from you and how you approach Chinese herbal medicine.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, first of all, I created classical pearls not only to have absolute control over the manufacturing and the sourcing of the herbs, but also to provide classical formulas in an already, in most instances, now of course we have unmodified classical formulas as well in the, I believe it's called the Heritage line, but the first 31 formulas were basically taking classical, very often Shan Lun formulas, and modifying them after being in practice for 20 years for for what seems to me the most common kind of modifications that for modern people and the kind of diseases we see in modern times, because it's hard enough for a new practitioner. And this is why our profession also is saying very often that this topic we started with were people claiming that they can't make a living with it, but it's we are in an amazing position as Chinese medicine practitioners in the United States that, different from Europe, you are legally allowed to carry a pharmacy on your own and sell herbs, not only teach people about that and give them consultation advice and then send them off to an apothecary where then somebody else is making the profit, but you have your own medicinary and you are selling the herbs to take home to patients. Yet, even though this is, and this is, if you would be doing this with every patient, your income would be much, you would be making more income from selling herbs to people than you would be making from just like I'm treating them for an hour. And now I'm getting this much money as the fruit of my labor here, so to speak. But despite that, and even though there are business classes at colleges, this is never, from my perspective, taught. But that 80% of people who graduate with an acupuncture license, and even if they get an herbal certificate, they only do acupuncture. And I think one of the reasons is this insecurity that you were mentioning there, that even though it's classified as a food, it's legally no different. Even something like aconite that's supposedly super toxic, it's no different than buying a bunch of peppercorns or cinnamon bark or something at the store, as some supermarkets already carrying herbs like gochizi or hoshobu, something like this, right? Yet we are teaching people to be careful with herbs, because even though anybody over 50 is now having an armful of orange pharmaceutical bottles in their bathroom, because when you go to your annual checkup, it's not like how it was with my father and grandfather, where it was always rest more, sleep more, eat more healthy, chew your food more, do some hot and cold shower, that kind of thing. It's all about immediately, whether you need that or not, pushing pharmaceuticals on you because it's all AI driven. And the parameters when you need something is decided by lobbyists, not by doctors. And
Mhm.
so quite literally, like you're over 50, now, no matter what your level of cholesterol is, people are going to tell you, doctor's going to tell you, you need to be on statins,
Yep.
because otherwise you can going to get a stroke or a heart attack when we know that this robs you of enzymes that the heart needs. And while your number may be going down, in the end, you might be having heart problems because of it eventually down the road because you interfering with some natural processes in the body. I'm not, of course, saying in every instance or so there may be a place for those sometimes, but this kind of thing is over prescribed and is definitely a racket. I had a patient said, my cholesterol was, I know, 200 or and the doctor said, "Oh, you need to be on statins." And he says, "Can you, in your AI program, can you bring it down to 160?" He still said you need to be on statins. He said, "Bring it down to 100," which is you want to throw yourself out the window. I mean, our brain is made out of cholesterol.
Right.
You need that. The
Mhm.
problem is the cholesterol accumulating in your arteries. That's why an arterial scan is a much better indication for whether you need statins or not, rather than some kind of number. Right? Many decades ago, cholesterol count of 300 was considered normal, and now it's like, "Oh my god, you feel over
Yep.
tomorrow," supposedly.
Mhm.
And so even with the 100, you would get morbidly depressed, most likely, or maybe get cancer if your cholesterol count is too low. And you still would be, the AI is saying you still need that. So that is very clearly not good, sound medical advice, but is profit driven by greedy corporations rather than, that where you need to be careful not to immediately trust that. And so the coming back a bit closer to your question there, the pharmaceuticals are overprescribed on one side, and on the other, even our own profession is teaching people that's, heart problems, high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer. That's something for real medicine. You just need to refer that out or keep your feet
Yeah.
or don't when they're already on drugs, which all of my patients on some level are already on drugs. If they are, then they need even more take herbs because Western medicine, no matter whether it's antibiotics or steroids or painkillers or statins or anything else, they all have one thing in common, and what is that? Is that it harms the body's jiangqi. It might regulate a single number somehow that feels more comfortable to the eyes of a Western medicine physician, but doesn't necessarily make the patient feel better. And even if it makes you feel better, it's a symptom suppression. It never is because the source of the problem is being healed. And so you still need Chinese herbs and Chinese treatments. And since you don't see your patient as an acupuncturist every single day, which you would need to do to refresh that meridian opening treatment, so you give the treatment, and then when they come back a month later, you say, for this month, you take this herb because that herb is mimicking what we did with the acupuncture. But if they're already in pharmaceuticals, most TCM schools say, oh, if they're already that, then you better not, and legal problems. And
Mhm.
when you don't tell them, don't eat, right? The Western doctor would never say, don't put pepper in your food. Don't, you know, use cinnamon or cayenne or something like that. That's basically what it is, and we have a medical license on top of that to prescribe that, even though legally you technically could prescribe that, consult people and tell them to take that without a license. So we had professional training in a lot of it, and we need to therefore unbrainwash ourselves, but to take that hurdle away, because this is how I started on this, is it's already complicated enough to learn hundreds of different formulas. If then on top of that, there is the demand that you need to individually modify those, then people kind of quit, or 80% of us quit and say, I'm only going to do acupuncture because you know what? Even sham acupuncture, which means I totally do needle the wrong points, has, at least according to German studies, I'm not an advocate of this at all, of course. I believe in classical acupuncture, but from a Western perspective, at least, has this so-called sham acupuncture has the same result as sort of highly trained, element or other kinds of acupuncture, supposedly. Don't know how they engineered those studies, but at the very least, unless you needle like here on the thorax, where the one problem can be a pneumothorax, as we all know, you stick particularly with the arm and leg points where most of the important points are. Other than the occasional bruise, there won't be ever any side effects. And no matter what points you needle, the people feel, "Oh, I got my treatment's worth." And you being flooded with epinephrines and oxytocin or whatever, chemicals it is that your body produces when you stick needles into it, just like people cutting themselves, there is some kind of flooding of certain, you self-medicating yourself somehow, it's relaxing or it's something. And so it's very safe to stick with that. And people who are afraid, who were made afraid at school and therefore don't believe in our own medicine, particularly the herbal medicine, are afraid of potential side effects. And the side effect, of course, this is real medicine. If you all of a sudden have a formula with 15 herbs and it's not only like one little sprinkle of it, like you would use a spice, but using like the equivalent of 90 grams of crude herbs or so, that's real medicine. That'll really do, I mean, that can get you out of heart failure if you use it correctly and over longer periods of time. And so that was the attempt with the classical pearls, using classical formulas that are very monodirectional, particularly in the Shanganmen. They're only dispersing, only consolidating, or only warming, or only cooling, or only drying, or only moisturizing. So I'm kind of always modified them that they are safer and that there was always yin within yang, consolidation within dispersing, and only using what I call alchemically stable herbs, meaning not using, more intense kind of herbs where you use them for 2 days and the person feels good. And on the third day, they feel they're getting a headache because it's now too much. Ephedra, for instance, I stay away from that. It's also, from a legal perspective, more difficult to import that, and in Europe, illegal entirely. But and so that way I have formulas where I feel like even if it's used wrongly, it's not going to be an issue where the person then will have like major side effects or so. And if there is people breaking out in a rash or so, for the most part, you find out then that they're detoxing or so, and that's actually a good reaction by their body. So I think part of the classical pearls success has been this kind of choosing alchemically stable herbs, picking formulas that are particularly suitable for modern times. I had good teachers, and my own experience of 20 years in the clinic and using buffering remedies to make them less monodirectional. Always have yin within yang, yang within yin. And that has been, we've, knock on wood, never had like some situation where somebody felt like they were kind of majorly harmed by imbibing a classical pearls product.
And so what's
And
the
at the
best
same
way?
time, having lots of, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh,
I
no
just
worries.
wanted to say this is another joy of mine where, I've always, in the last 35 years, always seen 25 patients about a week, spent like 45 minutes or an hour with the patient. And that may be more than some, but it's not, it's so very limited how many people you can see a year that and how many people you can help. Now with making, not only putting herbs in the hands of people that is already pre-modified, but then teaching people, not just from a Chinese perspective, since stuff like the pulse is so subjective, but saying like for these disorders, as long as this and this and that symptom is present, you can safely use this remedy. So that even like somebody who doesn't have rigorous Chinese medicine training, but a chiropractor or naturopath feels comfortable using it. We've had, I go and speak at a conference and people come up to you and say, you don't know me, but I just want to thank you for the glacier pearls because my aunt had, stage so-and-so lung cancer and, this is now completely in remission. And they said she had 6 months to live or so. So I feel like that this effort of my teachers and my own experience got multiplied with this endeavor. Now thousands of people can benefit from that. That's really probably the best thing I've ever and was launching that herb series and kind of making people more confident in herbal medicine, both consumers as well as practitioners, but really having had even from my perspective, where I sometimes go like, I would have never believed that this is possible, but because there are so many people using it now that there is these outlier cases that people report to me where, that, that's like close to raising the dead, right? Somebody who's like in a wheelchair with Lyme disease for 7 years, all of a sudden after 2 weeks, they start walking again. Or I do hear people write that to you and then you feel like, wow, you almost want to cry when you
Yeah.
hear that. But I don't know whether I answered your question there. You with feeling comfortable prescribing that, it's, I mean, that was sort of my attempt to make people to get the other 80% of us that are, while they are already in school, but especially once you graduate, to feel comfortable to start using that on yourself and for other people. And we did that also during COVID, where everybody else, lots of people closed their clinic and were like, we can't wait to get our hands on a live COVID patient because we want to see whether this medicine you know, it was said from the Neijing on that and Zhang Zhongjing says that in his preface to the Shanghai Lun that this medicine evolved on the back of pandemic. So that's all that Chinese medicine treated in the past. If somebody had a little bit of ulcer pain, they wouldn't walk to the next village and spend, a week's salary to see a doctor and buy medicines. They would only go when it was something life-threatening. And, here was this serious acute situation, and to see it work like right away, as advertised in the Neijing itself, was very corroborating there. And yeah,
You answered it in part. I feel bolstered, I think. I have raw herbs in my practice, and I've been prescribing and looking like there are certain patients that prefer to take a patent, and just the ones that I've had, I haven't really enjoyed very much, and I think I just overthought the formulas that you had, and, like, I should do more training. I tend to wanna learn a whole lot more before I start doing something, probably to my own detriment, so it's reassuring that I can use the book, and as long as patients match some of those symptoms,
yeah,
just
yeah.
try
This
them.
book, this was of the many publications I published or self-published. And this is the most important one. Has not only mine, but clinical experience of my very excellent teachers in there. And like every single word in there is very measured. It wasn't this kind of found it out in a weekend, but this was
Mhm.
written over a 2 year period. And like under the indications, like you have what kind of symptoms, like you have here are examples of Western diseases. And every single example, while you can treat many more things, had a clinical study in China behind that. And then under the typical signs and symptoms, they are all in order of importance, based on particularly my teachers and my own experience. So you look for the first symptom and the second symptom, it's and the third and the fourth and the fifth. And as long as you have one or two of those, that's good enough to prescribe that. That's
Great.
but then also you don't want to limit yourself with this crude herb situation because I used to only do I was like a radical traditionalist, and Chinese herbs are a little bit like French wine, where the originally the Chinese they exported 98% of Chinese herbs, and you got to whom? To Japan, biggest importer, Korea, next big importer, number three, the expat Chinese community in the United States and Canada and Europe. And then after SARS were the uh, equivalent of Anthony Fauci in China almost lost a daughter because Western medicine didn't work for that in 2001 or 2, whenever that was. And then she was saved by Chinese medicine. He immediately invested himself in Chinese medicine patent formulas and then, made tons of money when that same patent then was used during COVID. So there was the openness. And so ever since that time, before you would buy big bags of honeysuckle and it was like the most beautiful and fresh, didn't cost anything. It was all like $2 a pound or $4 a pound, but it was these beautiful herbs and still a lot of them wildcrafted. And now when they are mowing down the frontier in China, three things have happened is the Chinese themselves are starting to use the best herbs because they have the money to buy that. And they've shifted their awareness, particularly when there's an acute inflammatory something like COVID. You can't buy any herbs anymore for a while because everybody in China is using them. So the prices have not only doubled and tripled, but they have increased like 10 or even 100-fold. And then as a result of it, shipping the herbs on top of it has become super expensive. And then, of course, on top of it, you boiling it, the whole house smells like it. You and I might love that, but the people in the house, they go like, this is like this yucky stuff. And you seeing patients I see, that means you on these herbs for 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years. And even the most dedicated patient will eventually stop boiling the herbs and also buying that. Then, of course, the quality of the herbs, now the Chinese are sending us the worst. And everything that lands here is at least already 3 years old. And it's like in some huge warehouse in Guangxi that has 5 stories, and people with hazmat suits go through that. It's not even what they spray onto the stuff that's out in nature. It's what they spray while it's waiting there to be sold and distributed and
Wow.
packaged. And it's still like super wet. And so bugs are coming and mold is coming. And so they spray fungicide, they spray insecticide while it's there repeatedly. So something that's supposed to be a medicine is now becoming super toxic. And the main thing that gets tested for when it comes in is heavy metals.
Mhm.
That's just what's in the soil, not all this nasty stuff they spray on later. So because of all of these reasons, I always thought that the crude herbs were better. But now I think that this other solution is much, much better because patient compliance is much higher. They can open the capsules if they want to, and it's highly water soluble. You just can drink it that way, but 90% of patients or more, they're super happy that they can just swallow that
Mhm.
and don't have an hour brewing time where also sometimes you forget and then, oh my God, it's burnt now. You ruined the batch, right? And then, of course, there are lots of companies where they add then 50 or up to 80% of starch to either dilute down the heavy metals or to make it like Krispies or Twinkies to make it shelf life extension, right? And so then that powder always looks the same and people used to that but they not aware that they take the patent medicine that is actually 80 at least 50% starch. And that starch is mostly allergenic stuff like cornstarch, potato starch, even wheat starch. It's not stated on the bottle what the filler is, but they all have filler, lots of it, probably more than the herbs. And so that was a commitment of the classical pearls, not only use the highest grade herbs, use herbs that don't have heavy metals on top of that, and then extract it in a way without any fillers and just put it immediately in the capsule. And of course, you get sometimes this clumping sensation or so, but that doesn't affect the efficacy of the herb. But that's
Compelling.
another thing I want to, encourage you to not be too ideological about, oh, I'm a classical practitioner. I'm only using crude herbs. The most important thing is that you have high quality herbs that work and that are convenient for the patient to take because they are doing the heavy lifting. They need to take it every day.
Yeah. I do use spring wind only.
Yeah, spring wind is of course great, but they don't have all of the
No,
herbs
they don't
because
have everything.
yeah,
Thank
and
you.
yeah.
What do you think?
Dr. Fru, yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Fruehauf, for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. If it's okay, we'll wrap it up for today.
Yes.
But we'd love to have you come on periodically if you can manage with your time. It's such an education. So
Mhm.
we'll talk maybe offline about that. Maybe we can see you again sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, for having me here and having the time fly by here in no
Yeah, it did.
time. I enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for promoting Chinese medicine and doing something very important for our field here. Thank you.
Mm. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has.
I hope everyone takes care.
Same
Bye.
here. Bye bye.